Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's event on NFTs and the new digital collectivism. This is Enjiao or Ernie from the YLab team. So for those of you who are new to YLab, YLab is a product innovation lab of the gallery, working with artists, technologists, and the community to develop innovations for the arts and culture sector. So today's event is the final one in our three-part series on NFTs. They will bring the spotlight closer to home to look at how artists and collectors are engaging with this technology. YLab organizes programs such as this one to provide a space for learning exchange. So we very much look forward to hearing your thoughts, your views, and whatever questions you might have for our speakers today. Yeah. And so previously, we actually looked at how blockchain technologies has been used for archiving and to preserve records of our engaging with our audiences, as well as looking at how NFTs as revenge capitalism imposes a certain cost on society, hand in hand with its potential to address some of the most complicated challenges that we face. So today, we'll be looking at how NFTs can be used to engage with artists and collectives. So for today's session on NFTs and the new digital collectivism, we are pleased to have Kathleen Ditzig, a curator at National Gallery Singapore, specializing in the history of art and technology, as our host. Together with speakers from NFT Asia, Clara Pei and Jonathan Liu, we will explore how independent artists can navigate this space and how to bridge the traditional and NFT art worlds. So a disclaimer, as usual, before we start today's program proper. The speakers today are not registered financial or investment advisors, so all opinions expressed are the speakers alone. Nothing to be discussed today should be seen or relied upon as financial investment advice. The webinar is solely for informational and educational purposes only. So with that, I shall now hand the time over to Kathleen to take us through the program. Kathleen, please.
Thank you, Ernie. And thank you, YLab, for the opportunity to moderate or be part of today's conversation. As Ernie has shared, NFTs and the new digital collectivism is the last of our three-part series beyond NFTs. This was basically a series of panels that reflected upon how we write history, how we find value and communities, and how we understand ourselves as being part of a public, and how these ideas are actually shifting or may shift in relation to the risks and opportunities that NFTs and other technologies associated with the blockchain offer. So today's conversation takes NFT Asia, an online community, as a case study of how independent artists have been navigating the NFT art ecosystem toward more communal and resource-sharing aims. NFT Asia is a non-profit community that empowers Asian and Asia-based artists. First formed on Discord and Twitter, it has grown from a handful of friends in March 2021 to a following of 15,000. Since its founding, NFT Asia has been a self-sustaining collective that has worked with its artists and members to organize fundraisers, realize exhibitions, and develop opportunities for the community. Today's discussion between myself and two founders of NFT Asia will chart the development of this community as a means to unpack the complexities and politics of NFT Asia's approach to community building in the Web3 space. Today's conversation is really less about making money or managing money, but about how and what it means to maintain an artist-centric approach in this increasingly financialized and particularly speculatively financialized space. We have a one-hour conversation wherein you can ask questions in person, or if you're tuning in through YouTube, please use the chat function to ask your questions. So we'll do this one-hour session. At the end of this one-hour session, which is pretty much, we're just laying the groundwork for what is NFT Asia. It's an introduction to this community. After this hour, we'll take a break, and then for those who are here in person, we'll have a small closed-door workshop where we get to work through some of these ideas in greater depth, and you can ask much more technical or specific questions. It's basically any questions you have that this would be the only opportunity, perhaps, or one of the few opportunities where you can ask artists working in this space and cultural workers in this space what they think and what are maybe some of the pain points and what are some of the opportunities they see. So, without further ado, it's my privilege to introduce my two conversation partners today, Clara. So Clara, who's right next to me. Clara is one of the founders of NFT Asia. She's also art lead and curator at Appetite, where she curated Right Click and Save, held inside Le Freeport in November 2021, which was Singapore's first large-scale NFT exhibition. As an independent arts writer and researcher, Clara's work has been published in Hyperallergic, Art and Market, Art Collector magazine, among others. She has moderated and participated in talks and discussions on NFTs for Singapore Art Week, this museum, Vogue Singapore, the Blockchain Association of Singapore, and other spaces. My other conversation partner today is Jonathan. Jonathan is a visual artist and lecturer working primarily with photography. He is also a founding member of NFT Asia, a community aimed at uplifting Asian artists within the NFT space. He's interested in the narratives formed through text and photographs, drawn from his fascination with narratives and the relationship between the artist and the poet. His recent works attempt to mirror and question our reality through representation and fragmentation of the landscape. His works deal with concepts such as memory, post-memory, and the search for the layers in between. He's exhibited in the UK, China, and Singapore. He graduated from London College of Communication with a BA degree in photography and is currently lecturing in LaSalle College of the Arts. So thank you, Jonathan and Clara, for joining us today. So to kick off this conversation, let's get down to the really basic fundamental question. How did NFT Asia start?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having us. Thank you for working with NFT Asia and allowing us to be a part of this conversation. So NFT Asia started in, actually earlier than March last year. We basically were brought together because, well, I was sort of writing this article for Art and Market, looking at NFTs and artists in Southeast Asia. And at the time, NFTs were just starting to come into mainstream consciousness, I would say, because of news surrounding the Beeple sale, more and more coverage surrounding artists who have been working with the blockchain and NFTs. And I was looking around at the time, trying to reach out to different artists around me and around Southeast Asia who dabble in NFTs. And then a couple of us found each other and realized that we were all trying to learn about the space, the vastness of the space, and we're very overwhelmed on our own and hope to kind of just be in the same conversation together, to share resources and learn together rather than alone. So we just started a group chat, and it was as simple as that. We really just set out to have a small community so that we can be sharing and growing together rather than individually. Then soon, we invited a couple more artists, specifically Siobhan, who had already a bit of a following in the NFT space at the time. And she saw that there were a lot of other artists outside of our networks who shared similar desires as we did. So we opened it up, called it NFT Asia, because we just wanted to carve out a space that specifically looks at artists from this part of the world. I think at that time in particular, February, March 2021, a lot of the conversations, if they were happening on Clubhouse, if there were drops, they would happen at like 2, 3 a.m., 4 a.m. our time. And so it felt like a lot of the conversations were concentrated in, a different part of the world. But as we opened up this community, we saw that, hey, there are actually a lot of artists, a lot of people who have been working on things surrounding NFTs and art here in Asia, the broad continent of Asia. So we felt, okay, then that means there is a community that has a need for this kind of space. So let's work towards building this space and allowing everyone kind of a home within this network to be able to connect with each other, to build resources and share skills together to grow in their individual journeys dealing with NFTs. So that was really the kind of founding story.
So how many founders are there actually part of NFT Asia? I mean, you mentioned Siobhan, but how big is this core group?
think it started with about 5 of us, but we have since expanded on our moderation team. So we kind of have a core team where we are more committed in terms of time and resources, and then we have a moderation team that kind of manages different aspects of things as well. So I would say the team is about 10 to 12 people.
So 10 to 12 people on your moderation team, 5 as part of the founders. Maybe for the audience here, could you tell us a little bit about this distinction? Because I guess, you're an informal community, right? You have no registration. You've come together first out of this group chat. Where was this group chat on initially? Was it always on Discord, or how did you guys?
I think it started, I think there was me, Clara, Speak, Siobhan, and Ernest. We initially wanted to get on Telegram, but I think Speak was like, oh, I don't have Telegram. And then we're like, okay, we'll put it on Discord. It's just another platform. And we didn't really know that, a lot of crypto native communities were using Discord specifically for that. And we kind of fell into Discord accidentally. So yeah, that was how we didn't choose it, but it ended up being on Discord.
So Discord came first, then Twitter second. So maybe tell us a little bit of how you guys evolved from platform to platform, because this is also really interesting, and we'll get into deeper questions about communities in relation to these platforms.
Yeah, I think when it was quite more of an internal conversation, it was mainly Discord, where just the 5 of us with a couple of friends that we've shared the link with. But when we started to open up to the public, we started the Twitter account because a lot of discussions about NFTs, crypto, and even kind of ways to sell or market your artworks is natively held only on Twitter. So there weren't a lot of kind of features on Instagram, for example. So it was mainly Discord and Twitter for the start. We've recently launched our website, so that is something new that's a year and a half in the making. But it was literally just Discord and Twitter for most of our engagement for the first year or so.
All right, this is interesting. So when you opened up to the public, when did that moment happen? And obviously opening up to the public became associated with that Twitter, but how did you guys grow to this larger community? When did you decide to go public as opposed to being a bunch of friends on?
I don't think it was that long into our channel. I think it was maybe a week or so.
It was like 2 days into.
Oh, 2 days? Okay.
Basically, as soon as we realized that there were other people who had similar desires, it was just like, okay, then let's just share the link, see who else was out there, who else wanted to connect in similar ways. And we really just started out with this intention of, okay, there are a bunch of artists who are lost. There are a bunch of artists in this part of the world who are feeling alone and isolated because they felt the conversation wasn't looking towards this part of the world. Then let's just get together, and through just having a network, through having a community of sorts, we can feel differently and we can build at a different kind of scale. Yeah.
That's actually really interesting because when we think about investment in Web3 and we think about technology more broadly, Singapore is a nation that is invested in a lot of these new technologies, and yet at the same time, it feels like, from what you were saying initially, that artists within this space didn't feel a kind of connection. So are we, coming as NFT Asia kind of evolved, would you say that when you first sort of started this Discord channel, it was a bunch of people, artists, creatives, working in isolation who felt no connection locally and therefore was trying to find a community to reach out to that represented them, but these communities were not initially here till kind of like NFT Asia emerged?
Well, I don't think necessarily we were looking for a community because this was a year and a half ago. I think communities weren't really a buzzword then.
Yeah.
Some of the founders of NFT Asia I knew before, such as Ernest, Siobhan, and I think we were all individually looking at NFTs, but not knowing that we were looking at NFTs. So we were just kind of working on our own research and looking at how it could help impact our individual practice. And kind of NFT Asia or the Discord kind of brought us together because we can now talk to each other. Because back then, I think it was still controversial in a sense for, kind of traditional artists to step into this NFT space. So I think it gave us the opportunity to kind of skip the icebreakers and be like, oh, you're looking at NFTs too, cool. What have you found? What excites you, what interests you? And that was how kind of these discourses were formed internally. And we extended that out to the public in that sense.
It's still controversial, isn't it, in some ways? Like, there are artists who have taken very strong positions against or for and have different positionalities in relation to that. I have to ask, and this is a segue in relation to the narrative we're kind of building here, how much have you felt that NFT Asia has become a space, whether it's the Discord channel, whether it's Twitter, whether it is, you turning up at an event like this, holding space for actually some of those controversial and much more tense discussions around this medium?
I think internally on Discord, what we've established through, so for example, when you go into our Discord, you have to first agree to the rules, the guidelines, before you can really enter the rest of the space. And part of the guidelines is really to set up the space such that it has to be respectful to everyone. We're trying to engage in conversation and learning together, and that's really a key aim of NFT Asia's Discord. And so within the Discord, at least, especially with our team of moderators, we always try to make sure that if there is a conversation, that it can be tense, that can be divisive, that there's a particular kind of space that we want to hold or an environment we hope to facilitate such that those conversations can happen rather than it being like, oh, you disagree and I feel this way, I feel that way. Well, we don't really want that. We do feel that it can be tricky, say on Twitter or on other kind of channels where a lot of these conversations are taking place, for there to be more nuance, just because to speed with it, things kind of move. So hopefully Discord, allowing for more longer form conversations, can hold a different kind of space. And I guess externally, as individual members of both the team, but also as just part of the community, several of us, like John and myself, I think actively want to look more into like the research or the cultural development parts of this conversation. And NFT Asia, I think we're quite lucky to have a few artists, a few cultural workers in the team, but also in the broader community, who occupy spaces in both kind of this digital art ecosystem as well as the quote-unquote traditional art ecosystem. Like John, is a lecturer at LaSalle, an artist who has this independent art practice prior to NFTs. Myself, working in a curatorial capacity, also lecturing at LaSalle, that we're able to kind of form as bridges across both conversations. And I think we also, as individuals, kind of take it upon ourselves to think about, why are there certain criticisms coming from different parts of this conversation? Because ultimately, if we all share the same goal of, hoping that we can build more sustainable ecosystems for the arts, that artists can make a fair livelihood, that they can find sources of support for their practice, that they can thrive in this kind of world, then I think those conversations and the differences we share about looking for what do those structures look like? And I think there are a lot of the criticisms towards NFTs are fair. It is something that is in stage of nascency. A lot of these criticisms could help the ecosystem broadly move towards places that are perhaps more ethical, perhaps more equitable and welcoming to new members. And I guess we see ourselves as hoping to be, facilitators of those conversations. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to add on. It's also kind of understanding, there's a diverse spectrum of perspectives of people in the space. We have artists coming from the traditional background. We also have new artists who were, creating artwork digitally and using NFTs as this first step into kind of monetizing their practice as well. And it's this space that we want to create to allow kind of these cross conversations with different people and different stakeholders within the space.
Okay, so I'm going to rewind. Thank you very much for bringing some nuance, actually, to the understanding of how this landscape pans out, that it's not as black and white as maybe the media would have us perceive sometimes. And, if you spend 2 minutes on a Twitter page, somehow it can paint a very divisive picture, right? So thank you for giving us some insight and some nuance. Now, I kind of want to, again, go back to basics, because I think that what you're laying out, and in a sense, NFT Asia's evolution is very recent. It's obviously a year and a half old. Obviously, it's your audience has grown from a bunch of friends having a conversation to 15,000 people, which in and of itself brings up a whole different host of questions. But before we get to that, can we get back to how each of you found NFTs or Web3 and crypto? Because I think, Jonathan, you said something interesting, that some of your friends and the core group that came together around NFT Asia were already individually exploring NFTs. So this is obviously, was this in relation to the hype that came out because Metacoven suddenly purchased, or was this something that is a much more longer engagement because of maybe personal interests around crypto?
Yeah, I think maybe to start off personally, I started looking at NFTs purely as a curiosity, as an artist who was trying to make a living, selling my work. And I remembered buying, a little bit of Bitcoin and Ethereum in 2017 during, that previous hype period, and realizing that there was not a lot of things you can do with cryptocurrency. There would be maybe a crypto cafe that you can buy coffee with, but other than that, there wasn't a use case for kind of spending your crypto or using your crypto. And it was only during COVID where I think sales of NFTs and artwork started picking up, and I was looking at the space and be like, okay, I've got some crypto, I am an artist, maybe this could benefit me in terms of finding an alternative way to kind of market myself. Because this was, during the pandemic, where there weren't a lot of opportunities for artists, creators, freelancers, people working in the arts. So I started to look at that purely just out of curiosity, and kind of fell deep into the rabbit hole of researching about the technology, because this is something so new to me personally, but also new to the environment that I was in, with contemporary art. We often don't think about this layer of digitization, aside from putting your artwork on a website. So that was that ability to commodify your artwork, during pandemic was really interesting for me personally.
Clara, before you answer that, I know you come from a different position. I kind of want to lean into that a bit, Jonathan, maybe for the benefit of some of the audience here, but also those that we have online. Artists are always looking for ways in which to sustain their practices financially. So in a sense, there's nothing sort of new about that. But would you say that COVID was a push? And I kind of also want to understand, because the names that you bring up, like Ernest and Siobhan and yourself, how much traction were you getting with traditional art gallery, the traditional art space before exploring NFTs? We know that the art world is and especially the art market, whether we're talking international, whether we're talking regional or local, can be very exclusionary and isn't totally open to everyone. It's not easy to get on the ladder. We all know that. So could you give us a little more context to, how, maybe the situation in your practice or what you found in relation to your friends?
I think, working with photography, being in the contemporary art space, limits, the sort of opportunities that I get. It can be, only having access to maybe 1 or 2 institutions in Singapore that actively shows contemporary photography. And if you kind of look at photography historically, they were not always kind of regarded as fine art. Maybe until like the 1960s or 70s. And I saw the NFT space being quite perfect for photography in a sense, because people were already uploading a lot of their work on Instagram and kind of platforms where it's mainly visual. And this just allows it to kind of reach your audiences at the same time them being able to support you. So I think to compare to my experiences of working with within the traditional art scene in that sense, my only options were to, apply for opportunities within this subset of institutions, apply for open calls in kind of festivals, maybe a couple times a year, and not being able to do things unless we kind of work on it independently, building exhibitions, making photo books, going to Singapore Art Book Fair, for example, and having that opportunity to have conversations around your work. And I thought this digital layer is much wider of a space for myself.
No, thank you so much for sharing, because I think one of the things that we often talk about when we talk about NFTs as a technology and a medium, we talk about scarcity. Everyone's so hung up on the scarcity thing because suddenly, oh yeah, we can sell a digital asset, we can sell digital art. But one of the things that we talk less about is this sort of peer-to-peer direct audience engagement or the creation of your kind of community. And I'm not saying this as a booster, but I'm kind of saying this as another factor that it seems from what you're saying is what drew you into it. I mean, do you feel, and that's the first thing that comes out of your comments, I mean, am I reading what you're saying correctly? That part of it is also, being able to reach out to your audience directly as an artist, and also being able to find a way to sustain your practice, however much smaller than the scale of commissions through institutions or whatever. That's those benefits that actually come out for you directly from NFTs or working with NFTs.
Yeah, I would say it's broadly accurate. In a sense, to summarize things, there were not a lot of opportunities for a lot of artists in Singapore. Yeah. And it's not about hard work, or if you work long enough and kind of put yourself out there, you can get these opportunities, but I think it's just too small, and we need to kind of create these opportunities for ourselves. And it can be quite an insular kind of network of institutions, galleries, museums that would be kind of willing to experiment with new artists as well. So I think not that NFTs will kind of replace the traditional art market, but it presents an alternative for those who are not within that framework of a network.
Thanks, John. All right, so Clara, returning to the question, how did you get into NFTs personally? Was there a person, how did you get interested? What sparked this interest? And I know you have an economics background, so.
Yes. So when I first heard about NFTs, I heard about it in the context of CryptoKitties. And so I wasn't super duper interested because I thought it was more about, collectibles. It was more like Neopets or Beanie Babies, but like NFTs, like on the blockchain. And only after, I think, a couple months after that conversation, I learned that there were artists who were already experimenting with, say, DAOs, like TerraZero, or, other artists who have been working as artists kind of through NFTs. And then, of course, soon after, the Beeple sale. So it was during that period, kind of early 2021, where I start to relook at this conversation and confront my earlier kind of assumptions against the space, to see that, okay, well, if this is a way to open up a parallel market, especially for that of digital art, then perhaps, it's going to draw in, and it was already happening rampantly at that time. It was going to draw in new collectors. It was going to bring in, different groups of artists, like John is saying. And that means that this could be, perhaps it could influence the change of consumption and production of art in years to come. And so I felt that as someone who's interested in contemporary art, who's curious about how this global ecosystem will continue to develop, that I saw it almost as like a responsibility to kind of lean into the research of the space and try and understand what was happening. I was previously rather just, not, I guess I didn't really fully understand blockchain or crypto, even though I started looking at it around 2018. Christie's Art Tech Summit, for example, the first one that really talked about blockchain happened in 2018. So at the time, I was doing a bit of research around it, but couldn't quite grasp it until a little later. And so with all of that happening, it just kind of made sense to look into it and consider what it could bring. Especially with the Beeple sale, I think it did signify to a lot of artists of working with digital mediums who had been following Beeple for years before that, artists specifically working with 3D digital illustration, that, hey, perhaps there is an economy that's going to value our work, the ways in which we look at visual cultures differently. Beeple was someone that, for example, signified, he represented a lot of things for digital communities. A lot of collectors that supported his work are more internet kind of native, who have been a part of these crypto kind of blockchain conversations for a long time, and they felt this is the kind of visual culture that represents us and what we want to support. And it kind of makes sense whenever there's like a new wealthy class that they would naturally support the arts and culture that is most direct in the communities that they have built. And so it just seems like, okay, this is going to be an opening up, perhaps a parallel ecosystem, and I want to understand it. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Clara. And thank you, Jonathan and Clara, both of you, for giving some background. I think, Clara, your latest, the comments you just made about there being a parallel ecosystem, and that this kind of drives home what NFT Asia has been trying to do about bridging between these different ecosystems and with the ultimate aim of creating opportunities for artists. Now, we've really heard about, how NFT Asia started, your own individual stories in relation to your interest in this technology. We're starting to get some questions, actually, from the public coming in. I'm going to address them shortly, but before we get there, I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit more to this idea or this prompt that this discussion has, which is about digital collectivism, right? So how, you've touched on this already, that NFT Asia kind of has a shared ethos, that basically it was artists within this sort of Web3 space, or working with different types of blockchain technologies, or making digital art, so forth, whatever, within this emergent ecosystem, right, that you were mentioning, didn't feel like they had representation, and also felt like this entire discourse and scene was aligned to a time zone that was not theirs. This is something that you started out with, right? So in a sense, there seems to be a shared ethos. So how would you actually describe the community of NFT Asia? And I mean, you go from 5 friends to 15,000. Who's being drawn into your community? And you already have moderators that manage discussions, per se. So, describe your community for us, actually.
Maybe we can start with the moderation team, for example. So besides, the few of us who started in Singapore, like Siobhan, Ernest, Speak Cryptic, who are artists and commercial photographers in their own right, we have someone from Japan who is a 3D projection mapping artist. We have designers from India. We have illustrators from Indonesia, Pakistan, and when you kind of expand and look at the members of, or maybe the active members of NFT Asia, they are mostly digital artists, working natively with kind of 3D illustrations, 2D illustrations, animation. We have some coders, programmers, creative programmers, and we have photographers. We have a wide range of artists working with different genres. I mean, we have an architect from Harvard, creating 3D spatial designs and artworks, inspired by that. And that range of artworks and art styles and genres that we don't usually see on a daily basis, with features in galleries, museums, exhibitions. So I think I would describe our community as artists who are experimenting with different ways to create, or are new to art itself, making art itself. And yeah, that's just some profiles of members. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's hard to come up with kind of strict categories around our members because we function very much like a loose collective. So we don't have any kind of application, there's no formal membership. It's really like, if we have an opportunity and you want to participate in it, you want to participate in an open call, welcome. And we don't exclude anyone outside of Asia as well. It's really like we prioritize artists who are Asian and Asia-based, and we often ask people to self-report, kind of if you identify with it. But even if you don't, you're still welcome to participate in our conversations, to be a part of the community, because it doesn't, you can be an ally or you can grow alongside us. But I would say, yeah, at the core, I think most of the very active members, as well as the team, are artists or cultural workers who have, an interest in kind of growing together. But we also have collectors, people who are curious about NFTs, who are just in the conversation because, they want to engage, they're curious as well. We don't really actively recruit anyone to join NFT Asia. We also don't kind of very strongly advocate for people to come on board or to dabble with NFTs. I think our stance is always very much of, if you're curious about NFTs, or if you would like to be a part of an artist-driven community, welcome to join NFT Asia. But if you don't see this as being interesting, or you wouldn't like to participate, that's also completely fine. But we mainly try to educate, or we try to build the support for people who are just kind of either curious, or you're already kind of in the space and would like to grow further. Yeah.
So this is where things get very complicated, right? Because you have a very open-ended community. In theory, anyone can join the conversation and anyone can be part of the community, because anyone who finds a sort of, the idea of NFT Asia resonating with them is welcome. So this is complicated, because then how do you resource share with such an amorphous community? So maybe could you tell us a little bit about what it means for you guys as founders to support the NFT Asia community? What are some of the initiatives you've undertaken? And maybe what are some of the decision-making mechanisms like as such a loose collective, right? Where you're not even sure how many members you have, and that's as fluid as someone dropping off your Discord channel or not,
Maybe I can share about it in 3 different layers. So we recently started to articulate kind of the work that we do and the work we hope to do increasingly in three kind of main pillars. So how we support our community, kind of the first layer, like we were talking about earlier, internally. By resources, we're talking about skills building, we're talking about sharing networks, sharing, learnings that we've had. So it's as basic as, say, like using the Discord as a public forum to crowdsource answers. Someone might be like, oh, I've never heard of this platform, has anyone used it? Or, oh, I'm encountering a problem in my software, how do I troubleshoot? And anyone can feel free to step in and kind of support you. And that's also why there's a need for some level of moderation, such that, the conversation's always producive and conductive, but that's the same case as any kind of online discussion space. And we also host workshops, we do kind of artist talks, or, just conversations. Like one initiative that we'll talk about more later in the second part of the session as well is called Pitch Practice, where we noticed artists had to come on Twitter Spaces or earlier Clubhouse for drop parties or these kinds of events to talk about themselves. But a lot of these artists in the space, they're identifying as artists for the first time. So they may not have had opportunities to really practice how to talk about yourself as an artist, and it's especially intimidating if English isn't your first language. So we provide those spaces where you can practice, you can get some feedback, and we're not proclaiming to be experts. We're just people who are able to hold space. We're committed to listening actively, and we're happy to reflect back what we're hearing so that you can grow in the ways you want to. So that's like the first layer, the base layer of what we mostly do within Discord to support members. And then the second layer is really outreach. So we think about, okay, what can we do as a collective that might be more difficult for an individual to achieve? It's things like participating in Art Dubai, which we did in March. It's things like getting an exhibition space in New York, which we're going to do later in June during NFT NYC. So we're hoping to leverage kind of our collective resources, our skills to create these opportunities, if not to connect artists to these opportunities and amplify their work. If you're really, really talented artist based out of, say, like a small town in Indonesia and you're doing great work, but you may not, already have the networks that can kind of connect you to different people who could be interested in your work. And being embedded in this network just increases those opportunities, allows kind of different cross-pollination of connections to happen. So that's work that we do externally in order to amplify, what artists are already doing. And then the third layer, which is longer-term work that we hope to embark on and do more of, is really to archive, to write about, to document, to kind of push more critical conversations surrounding artists who do work in these processes or work in these mediums and styles. I think a lot of what can happen in the NFT space kind of in the longer term is, and we know that in this moment, there's a lot of work that's just being started to kind of write about the art history of NFTs or the definitive kind of voices of what's happening in NFTs and art. And our fear, and we've kind of seen this happen already, is that artists from this part of the world who may not yet be connected to people who want to write these stories would be left out. So a lot of the work we're currently thinking about as well is really growing those parts. And I think we need a lot more support with that as well. So we can grow our research efforts, we can grow kind of more efforts surrounding producing critical cultural discourse, producing archive kind of efforts surrounding what's happened in the space, even what's happened with NFT Asia, such that, when you look at this stuff that's happening now in the longer term, that these works done by artists, by cultural workers in this space won't be forgotten. Yeah, so that's kind of the three main pillars that we're focusing on.
So, these are fantastic initiatives, and they are long-standing ways in which communities have rooted themselves, knowing their histories, knowing, the key participants, and also like finding representation, right? Taking up space in some ways. We have a couple questions that I want to get to from the public, and as a segue to these questions, I think one of the things that is quite distinct about this moment in relation to this whole question of the kind of support systems that you're providing to this very amorphous community, right? Which includes the artist in a small town in Indonesia, the artist in Singapore who's circulating between, maybe the international art world, and, we're talking about very diverse points of access, very diverse amounts of privilege, right, and positionality, and then also very diverse kinds of systems of support, because when you talk about there's a lack of maybe interest in critical engagement, right, and because these writers are maybe situated in the West where there's a longer history of of institutional support of and archives around digital art, let's say. I say that very loosely because there's actually a lot done within the region, but perhaps because the market for that is more set up in some Western centers, more directly related to these initiatives, that maybe there's more employment in that sense, that then there are more writers per se, right? I'm speculating here. You help me out if I am identifying the communities and ecologies that you see yourself working within and trying to really lobby for more space, right? Now, all of this is happening, and all of this is really interesting, and you guys are really trying to keep the most, it sounds to me like a very democratic understanding of what it means to be a community, what it means to be a collective, beyond the type of branding of communities and lifestyle sort of consumption that we have now, right? It seems to me also that you are one of the exceptions for a lot of people that are looking for opportunities to support artists and provide infrastructure for artists that are maybe left out of the narrative, that you have dedicated yourself to being nonprofit and as non-institutional as possible, because you haven't set up an organization. You have, you're basically a bunch of people on the internet, There's no real formal protections, you're not thinking about that. You're really just actually thinking, how do I support these people? Ad hoc projects here and there that you collectivize based on who's free, it sounds like, or who's able to put in more time, right? So let's talk about this and let's lean into this as we take the public questions, because there have been situations where you have been, first of all, there are two things that seems to be, there have been situations where you have predatorial actors coming in and wanting to financialize you, right? And you've been approached before to be like, I want to buy your community because this community is so hot right now and you have access to all these people, so you provide, and we'll help you provide support or whatever. Can you talk a bit about that, the pressures that you face from those kinds of actors, but also what it means to resist those pressures collectively? Because maybe, I'm assuming, out of maybe your 5 core founders and your moderators, collectively, when you're decision making, how do you make those decisions? How do you make that decision to continue to be nonprofit? To say, no, we're not going to sell out, even though that paycheck may be very useful to that one person in a small town somewhere. Do you know, how do you maintain this? It's a big question. Take it however you want.
I mean, maybe to provide some context, most, if not all of us on the team are working full-time. We have practices, we have careers outside of volunteering our time for NFT Asia. And I think, with regards to the questions about facing these pressures of wanting to financialize the community or monetize the community, we are not entirely against the idea of kind of monetizing communities, but we feel that NFT Asia can have better, or maybe we have more potential in building an ethical, safe alternative of a community without, this inflow of monetization, because we are able to kind of hold ourselves accountable for, the vision that we collectively want to achieve as kind of, different stakeholders within this space, and it definitely would be much easier to have resources to be able to, kind of dispense time and labor to certain things to get them done. But in a sense, it's also what makes NFT Asia, I think, fair and balanced and, in a sense, different from the other communities that may be over-monetized, because then you have to work with basically, if you're working with a VC, for example, and they have platforms and blockchains that are working with them, then you might be compelled to, promote or mint on certain platforms that you may not be interested in. So with NFT Asia, we want to remain blockchain agnostic. We don't really want to talk about, the different crypto ecosystems out there. We want to focus on what kind of opportunities can we provide for artists. So in a sense, we are kind of we are separating ourselves from, I would say, the monetary part of NFTs, which is, headlines that you see of anthropomorphic zoo creature collections and, multi-million-dollar sales. But we want to kind of remain grounded in how we can approach, creating these opportunities.
I think we're very much learning. We do intend to stay nonprofit, and by that, we also recognize that nonprofit communities also require base levels of kind of resources or shared networks of resources in order to get things done or to provide opportunities. So for example, we went to Art Dubai, and for that, we also required a certain level of resources such that we could afford, say, the booth rental fee. To make an exhibition happen, there are certain kind of resources that are needed as well, or partnerships that we need to seek out, people who share the same vision of wanting to support artists so that these events, meetups, activations can take place. So we're not we do work together in these ways. However, I think when we're thinking about not wanting to monetize the community is that we don't want to sell the community to an external organization, because I think people have joined NFT Asia and stayed with us over the past year and a half in a space that moves so rapidly, in which so many people join and leave conversations all the time, and in a climate where your time and engagement on Discord can also be monetized. For us, the fact that people have believed in this community and given so much of their own time, wanting to connect genuinely, means we all see value in it and we all believe it's important. And so if NFT Asia never set out to be that kind of, to kind of sell an audience for a project, for example, then let's not move towards that. If people came here because they believe in artists connecting with artists, they believe in having genuine conversations, they believe in certain kinds of support that we've been providing so far, so let's continue building towards that. Let's ask ourselves, ask the community, what brings value for artists, and move towards those areas in ways that are congruent with the core values that we sought out to have. And I think it can be a lot of pressure. It can be really tricky to learn about how to navigate, say, wanting to have real-life events, for example, while being a digital native collective community. And at the same time, we're also, learning, especially with this year, I think, as more and more kind of companies are coming into the space, there's definitely a race to kind of incorporate certain things, to earn certain names, and in that light, we've, definitely been put under pressure. But as much as possible, wanting to navigate around that such that we can stay true to the things we set out to be. Even our team of moderators, they really only joined the team because they were already active. They were already putting in a lot of time into the community and believe in wanting to provide that space. And that's how they came on board as well. So we were brought together by this mutual belief, I think. And yeah, so we want to kind of stay true to that as much as we can.
Thanks so much, John and Clara. We have about 6 minutes, but we'll stretch it just to 10 very quickly. And these are going to be rapid fire questions. So first things first, and this is related from the public. What is NFT Asia's impression of the recent MetaJam NFT exhibition? Or maybe how are they different from you guys? Rapid fire, one sentence answers if possible.
I think they are very collectible centric, whereas NFT Asia focuses on, artworks, one-on-one artworks or collection of artists.
Okay, Clara, next one's for you, rapid fire. This one is, what were some of the learnable moments running Right Click and Save for the exhibition of the Freeport, and how different was maybe that community around that exhibition and its making than NFT Asia?
Well, there were a lot of learnable moments. I think one thing was definitely that it was very interesting to see how people responded to the works in person and in that kind of context, as opposed to how they might have responded to seeing the individual kind of JPEGs. Let's say, we had some meme works like Pepe the Frog derivatives, rare Pepes, and they were shown in the context as being early explorations of, art on the blockchain around 2016. And through that kind of in-person setting, through that context of the exhibition where there was a narrative tracing the history of these conversations, I think a lot more people were open to learning about them and what they might mean for this community versus if they had simply come across the meme outside of context. So I think learning, just being reaffirmed how important it is to have those kind of spaces conducive for learning and history and context. How different was the community? Well, I suppose there were actually a lot of crossovers. A lot of members of NFT Asia or friends of NFT Asia also came to the exhibition, but that exhibition, we also collaborated with a lot of collectors who loaned their works to be shown. Is to see that, for the collectors, they're actually thinking about themselves as being patrons for like a new arts ecosystem, and they're also quite new to working with curators and exhibitions, but they are very curious and interested. So I guess being able to interact more specifically with that side of the conversations, I haven't had as much experience with up till then. Yeah.
Okay, let's go deeper into that in this after-post session. But I think you bring up a good point there, because one of the things to call to mind for the audience with right click and save is that, when you were talking about artists in this space not feeling like they have representation within the narratives, right click and save was almost the de facto kind of mainstream history, right? In a sense. It was like the big collections. It was largely like, crypto evangelists who had these collections to begin with, and funds, financial funds. So it's a whole different scale. And so in a sense, NFT Asia is like addressing, creating space in which those narratives maybe couldn't flourish within what right click and save was set out to do. We'll take a longer conversation about this, but if I understand you correctly, there's also that in relation to the earlier part of our conversations. Correct?
Yeah, I guess they had that exhibition had a particular kind of direction and aim it set out to achieve, and NFT Asia's is completely different. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we'll go deeper. Next question, rapid fire again, and maybe this is more for you, John. With the metaverse possibly on the way, how might NFT Asia negotiate such new opportunity and space? And I say again, rapid fire.
Well, it'd be great to have kind of digital space to show artworks without the pressures of, securing a physical space. So that could be something we can experiment with and build on.
Okay, so I'll expand on that because I'm going to push you there, because one of the interesting things I think off this panel that you shared with me is, one of the things that artists get from NFT Asia in this space is suddenly employment in Web3 companies and so forth, which is very different. Like, let's say extending a career in the art world and suddenly you're going into another industry. So do you see there being more opportunity in this sense, where there's new avenues for artists to produce, who can have day jobs in Web3 that are different maybe from artistic practice? Is that also that kind of opportunity, or is there going to be opportunity? Is there something for you as a photographer that you think Web3 is particularly exciting?
I think maybe the difference with, who currently is building within Web3 are maybe more tech-centric personnel. Whereas if you are an artist with knowledge about blockchain and Web3, you can, assert your knowledge and background into building this space. And I think a lot of us see, these metaverse galleries as recreating white cubes and, blank spaces that look like museums. But if we can, think about what exhibition space and how it can be recontextualized within the Web3 ecosystem, that could be, something that's interesting for artists to explore.
Thanks so much, John. All right, so this one is, this is directed to you, John, but I think it's a question that maybe both of you can answer. John, you said that NFTs were a good means for sustenance or sustainable, sort of sustaining one's practice for artists, right? Contrasted against speculation, largely, which is driving hype and followers, do you have a view on what would accord an NFT its value? So beyond, after the end of this hype cycle, right? And we're seeing multiple corrections within the cryptocurrencies, but also NFTs, there's been a huge drop-off, right? What is the inherent value for you outside the marketplace? And this is obviously a very reductive question, because actually maybe we're not talking about NFTs at all,
Well, I think there's merit in the technology rather than, relying on, making a lot of sales to link it to your success as an artist. But you can look at the technology to see how, transactions can be, in a sense, can be rethought and relooked at, for an artist. And I think not a lot of artists make sales because it is tough to market yourself in this kind of oversaturated space. But if you are able to maybe find a middle ground where you can get more collectors interested to support you without needing to basically rely or wait for a physical opportunity, I think that is something that we can look at.
Okay, Clara, I do want you to jump on this one, but because the next question, and we have 2 questions and then we'll close, guys. So if anyone here has a last minute one you want to throw in, now's the time. This comes from Simon, and I think this is really an extension of that last previous question. Can you go into top 5 functional advice, use cases, strategies, contexts that NFT creators need to jump on now, immediately? I mean, that's very broad. Thank you so much, Simon. And I think that your workshop will kind of go into this a little bit more, but teaser for our online community who unfortunately can't be here in person. What would be the 5 most exciting things for you that you feel, that you wish an NFT creator would jump on right now?
It's really hard to come up with a list on the spot, but I think the first thing perhaps is, well, as we've been talking about, just this parallel ecosystem to show work. The second is perhaps because community and collectivity is such a big conversation in this like digital space right now that, you know, it's a great opportunity to meet people outside of existing networks. Third is perhaps the fact that, you know, the space is still rather nascent. So for ourselves as well, I think me personally, there's a lot of space to explore how to shape this culture and think about what are the tools that we can build together, you know, to foster a space we'll believe in better. That I think because it's so nascent, there's more space for it. Fourth is perhaps the fact that there are a lot of opportunities right now, specifically looking at NFTs. It has become quite a bit of a buzzword at the moment. So if you are someone looking for more opportunities, you know, perhaps exploring what just working with NFTs could bring outside of existing opportunities, that could be another thing. And then I think lastly, just recognizing how vast and broad NFT technology actually is. It's not just for art, even though NFT Asia mainly focuses on the art, that we're talking about art, specifically one-on-one artworks by individual artists most of the time within our community, but it's really not just for that. And there are a lot more possibilities that, you know, in which people have adapted NFTs you can look into being able to participate, I think, in that cultural moment is very exciting. But going back to your earlier question, I think what accords an NFT artwork its value? If you consider that NFT is just a transaction mechanism and the artwork is the artwork, then you're really asking yourself what accords an artwork its value.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that, John? Any 5 or 1 trend strategy that we should jump on right now?
Definitely find opportunities to show your work and talk about your work whenever you have that opportunity.
Wait, what does it mean to show your work?
Just have your work out there. I think coming from me personally, you know, I have made work, but when you don't put your work out there, you cannot have a conversation about it. And whatever the space, be it physical or digital, and I think it's much easier in the digital space to be able to find that opportunity. Even, you know, tweet about your work, engage in a thread, and, you know, tag people that you want their comments on, or DM people. I think that is something that NFTs have, you know, brought forward for this space, that openness to talk about things.
Thanks so much, John and Clara. I'm going to take one last question, and then we're going to end this conversation, and then we'll take a break and then transition for the people here. Now this one, and I think we should end on this note actually, is a controversial question. People, you know, what do you say to the critics or individuals, you know, like there's a lot of talk right now where people are trying to figure out the space in relation to blockchain, in relation to the speculation. Sometimes it's hard to see the ecology and ecosystem around artists using NFTs or, you know, communities such as your own, right? It's hard to see beyond the speculation and the financialization because some of the loudest voices are really people who have vested interests, right? Vested interest in promoting a specific chain, vested interest in, you know, playing out some VC's dream or, you know, whatever. There's a lot of vested interest. Now, what do you say to the critics who say that you guys as NFT Asia are unreliable narrators or unreliable speakers because you yourself may have vested interest. So that's why I say this is a controversial question, right? Because there are a lot of assumptions made in this space about players. And it's very clear from our conversation that you're very committed to the community, and however amorphous that may be, and I'm sure people will have critiques of that along the way, but you have a certain ethos here that you're looking for representation. You're looking to hold space for a specific community of artists who don't have access in some ways and are a very diverse group that maybe it's harder to pull them together, and it's whoever throws in a sense, right? But what would you say to these people who would say that, okay, well, I can't trust NFT Asia's project because, all of you are in Web3 in some shape or form, or you have your own personal vested interests. What do you say to these kinds of criticisms?
I mean, it's a tough question because I don't think we have thought about NFT Asia kind of in that light. And what we try to do is to, be as chain agnostic as possible with our approach. I don't think we ever talk about the kind of financialization of things specifically, but rather kind of if you look aside from the fact that we have artworks minted on blockchains, we are engaging in a conversation with artists about their art, about their practice, about finding ways to show that. And I think we definitely will always be correlated with, this market that we're in. But I would say to have an open mind about how people choose to leverage the technology for themselves, because we come from a privileged point of view where we can say we have an evolved art ecosystem in Singapore that we do not require blockchain technology or kind of ways to reach audiences. But it's not the same for a lot of other people all around the world that may not have that access.
So I guess, thank you, John. That's really great. Before you respond, Clara, I think I should have nuanced this. Some people claim that you guys have conflicts of interest by naturally being in the space. So, do you think that this is a little bit arcane to think this way? Archaic to think this way, because maybe your form of collectivism, which is really about creating opportunities, and some of these are financial opportunities for artists, is the way the world is going, and we need to rethink these kinds of political frameworks by which we say yeah, but I don't trust your voice.
Well, I think skepticism is fair, and if it's constructive feedback for us to grow and learn, that's also fair. We are in the stage of learning and very much welcome help. But I think it's difficult, especially at this point, to talk about what is Web3, what is NFT, what is the experience of artists in the space, unless you're actually deeply active and looking at the space. So yes, potentially, there are times when we're having conversations about, what support most artists need. We're drawing from our examples within NFT Asia, and it's difficult to be fully expensive and representative of the whole space. But I think the fact that we are nonprofit, the fact that we are an artist-centric, artist-driven community, and speaking specifically to those things, I think that's as best as we can to kind of represent the community that we have. We don't, try to proclaim that we understand everything kind of that's going on out there, or that we necessarily represent the absolute truth. But yeah, I think at this point, it truly is very difficult to talk about it unless you're actually looking at it or actively, paying attention to it. So,
and in this regard, the last thing is, if you could just agree, or maybe just one of the nuances to NFT Asia within the space and this type of commentary that comes out is also that you mediate sometimes between collectors and artists, right? Because sometimes there are issues in relation to, can you trust someone on the other side? What is the motive? But also understanding what are more healthy practices, right? So you do this kind of mediation with multiple communities, right? Or multiple positions within the community.
Yes, I think in those situations, we're really also drawing from the fact that, for example, this is a collective, but also the fact that some of us have experience watching how things unfold in, the traditional art world or traditional art market, learning best practices from different spaces and thinking about how they could be adapted for this space. For example, because a lot of our artists might be very new to thinking about themselves as artists, representing themselves for the first time, there are a lot of conversations that could feel very pressurizing. For example, if a collector is like, why don't you have a certain story to your work? Why don't you move your work toward a certain direction? As an artist, without representation, without mediation, and knowing this is someone who's a direct patron of your work, that can be a lot to kind of work through. And in those situations, we try to provide a space for those conversations, but also to kind of support the artist in thinking through what is actually in the best interest of their longer term practice. So we're not trying to kind of tell them what to do, just to provide them different, considerations or to even mediate that conversation if we're asked to in individual capacities. But yeah.
Well, that certainly is complicated, but certainly we can see clearly the ethos that you're trying to put forward and hold true, and the space you're trying to keep as you navigate these complexities. Thank you so much, John and Clara, for joining us today, and thank you for our audience for joining us. Before I hand over to Ernie, I just wanted to thank Ernie, Kevin, Eunice. There's quite a team that's behind this program. Cephas as well, who has been developing and actually making these conversations available to you, our public. So thank you so much for all the hard work and the opportunities. And thank you for tuning in this afternoon.
Yeah, so hello everyone. This is Ernie from the YLab team. Thank you to all of you, whether you're joining us online or in person, for spending your time with us. So please give us your feedback by scanning the QR code that you should be able to see on the screen, or go to the link, as this will help us to improve our programs. So we hope that this series on NFTs have given you some food for thought, perhaps even inspiring more questions in everyone. And so huge thanks to our speakers today, the organizing team, our audience online and in person. And so yeah, we hope to see you at our future events. So with that, we'll be ending the online live stream soon. So bye-bye to our online audience. And then for those of you who are here with us in person, as shared by the NFT Asia previously, if you're curious about some of the tools, processes, and actual resources that will go into developing your craft in this space, on how you can get started in this space as an artist, do stay around for the second half of the workshop. We'll be starting that in about 10 minutes after a brief bio break. So, you can stretch your legs and go get some water or whatever. So we hope to see you back here in 10 minutes. Yeah, thank you.